very much, Brendan, and thanks very much to Tom Kelly and everybody else who's been involved in establishing Evolve. I absolutely share your mission to ensure here in Northern Ireland, as I think we did eventually start to do in Scotland, and they started to do in Wales too, that we discuss the policies that our devolved parliaments and assemblies and executives and governments can actually implement, and the choices that face the elected politicians and the people they represent. So a big welcome to Evolve, and all the very best for your debates in the months and years ahead. It's good to be able to speak in that former First Minister capacity, Brendan. One of the benefits is I don't have to wear a tie to events like this anymore. The last time I was here speaking in Northern Ireland, I've been back since, but the last time I was here speaking was at Stormont in May 2006, and I remember the pressure that day to check very carefully again and again before I got on my feet the words that I was going to use at a delicate time. And perhaps today I can be a bit more relaxed about some of the things that I say about devolution and its potential and its challenges. It's also great to be here in the Ulster Hall, refurbished Ulster Hall. One of the great pleasures about being First Minister, and I'm sure Peter and his colleagues enjoy this experience too, was the ability to see new facilities, or refurbished facilities, and their potential come to the fore. And one of the last events I did as First Minister in Scotland was to open a new school, Williamwood, in the south side of Glasgow. And it was a fantastic event, it's a great school, one of Scotland's best comprehensive schools. And we were opening this fantastic new facility. The kids were looking absolutely fantastic, performing on the stage, making speeches, lots of parents there, teachers, staff. The whole school was very proud of its new facilities. It looked like the school was absolutely perfect. And after the opening ceremony, I was asked to go to the head teacher's room to do a radio interview with some of the guys from the media. And as I passed the door into the head teacher's study, there was a young lad sitting on a seat outside the head teacher's room. There's always one somewhere in the school, and that morning he was it. And some of you may know that I was a school teacher in the 1980s, mathematics teacher, and that old teaching habit does kick in on these occasions. So as I passed this young lad, I stopped and said, "What have you been doing sitting outside the head teacher's room today?" And he didn't look up, he had his head down, and he sort of murmured something to himself. And I said, "I'm getting some trouble," and he went, "I've been in trouble." And I thought, what can I say? I'm not a teacher anymore, so I can't give him a punishment. But maybe I can say something else that might just give him a bit of a shock. So I waited until he looked up and I said, "Do you realise that I'm in charge of all the prisons in Scotland?" And he looked up at me. This is absolutely true. He looked up at me and said, "You know my big brother Robert then?" Always think before you say it. For a class of school children. Can I also take this opportunity to congratulate Peter, the First Minister, Deputy First Minister McGuinness, Ian Paisley, Jerry Adams, David Trimble, John Hume, Seamus Mallon, everybody who's worked so hard over these last 10 years or so to create the Evolve government in Northern Ireland. It's been a rocky ride in those 10 years, never mind for the decades before it. I absolutely admire everything that you have done. I admire your bravery in taking on the challenges that creating the Evolve government to Northern Ireland poses, and I admire the way that you continue to strive to make sure that people of Northern Ireland have the government they deserve and the improvements that I'm sure they and their families want to see. And I am always at your disposal to help in that process, and I wish you all the very best in the debates that will come. For my own part, my journey in devolution, I suppose, starts in March 1979. I cast my first vote as an 18-year-old in the Assembly referendum in Scotland on the 1st of March 1979. And I actually chaired the university campus Yes Committee, one of the first political positions, I suppose, that I ever held. And I remember the devastating impact or the disappointment of not securing the Assembly at that time. I had a passionate belief even then that it was the right thing for Scotland, and we saw in the years that followed the impact of not having our own elected Assembly or Parliament to govern our own domestic affairs. In the 1980s, as a teacher, I saw the direct impact of a government losing touch with its people, as the then Conservative government did in Scotland. The worst example of that was a poll tax imposed on people against massive public resistance. But we also saw the disconnect in the economic disintegration that took place at that time, and the social disintegration that still plagues us today. I am a real believer in devolution. I cannot think of an example anywhere in the world where, on balance, a devolved government of some sort has not led to the improvement of people's living conditions, better governance, and a better future for citizens. I definitely believe that in Scotland we had an absolute duty to democratise the national institutions that we had since 1707 and before. I believe that devolution is right for Scotland and will remain the right constitutional structure. But I also, as an individual, as part of why I became a teacher, I believe very, very passionately in education and in tackling discrimination, and I hope they have been marked in the first few years of devolution and the achievements that we have seen in Scotland. I was actively involved in the convention in the 1990s when we put together the great consensus for the scheme that became the Scotland Act, and in 1999 I had the absolute privilege of becoming a minister, first of all Finance Minister, Education Minister and then First Minister. I do remember being appointed Finance Minister and Donald Dewar telling the Queen that the reason I had become Finance Minister was that because as a former maths teacher I was the only person in the place that could count. But we did face challenges in those early years, and I want today to just briefly reflect on, I think, maybe the three stages: the work beforehand, the early years, and then how devolution developed, and then perhaps throw out three issues that might provoke some discussion. In terms of preparation, the situation in Scotland is remarkably different from the situation here. We built in the 80s and 90s in Scotland a consensus, what became the settled will of the people of Scotland, for a devolved structure that ultimately had a massive yes vote in a referendum and allowed the new Parliament to come into great popular acclaim. That reflected in many ways the fact that at the time of the creation of the Union there had been an understanding at that time that Scottish institutions, our separate legal system, our separate church and so on, these national institutions of Scotland would remain in place within the United Kingdom. The Convention, nearly 300 years later, was the way of bringing all that together again into a democratic structure that people in Scotland could accept and work with. But we were then faced with the challenge of meeting the massive expectations that existed in May and June and July 1999. And I think it's fair to say that halfway through that first period, between 1999 and 2003, through the first term, there was a danger that devolution in Scotland would fundamentally lose the support of the people of Scotland, and the very institution itself was starting to become questioned in a way that would have been inconceivable just 2 years before. We had seen, obviously, the absolutely tragic death of Donald Dewar, but we had also seen a series of sometimes minor, sometimes major scandals. We'd seen the price of a new building escalate out of control, and that damaged the reputation of the new institution itself. I think we had seen politicians who were not prepared for the responsibilities of office in terms of the clarity of the strategy, the sense of purpose, the policies that they were going to pursue, and that's why